Take control of your life. Let the chains rise. No more feeling powerless. No more shame. Take your power. Break out of the pain. Because it's more than fornication. More than procreation. It's not just self-stimulation. Sex energy is co-creation. Transformation. And to a new destination. War time. Yeah. Change your heart from dark to light. War time.
You gotta download this.
Break free. Take back your power. This is Pxrn Talk. This is Pxrn Talk Live. Here is your host, Eric Zuzak. Welcome to Pxrn Talk. This is Powerful Eric. This show is not just about breaking addictions, it's about breaking belief systems. We are bound by self-imposed and societal chains. Break those rusty, heavy old chains and get empowered right now. Today, we have the pleasure of hosting two extraordinary individuals who bring a wealth of knowledge and wisdom to the table. Joining us are Zach and Sierra, seasoned relationship coaches with over a decade of experience and an inspiring 20 plus years together. They host a podcast called Be Intact. They have dedicated their lives to empowering others to break free from barriers, embrace authenticity, and build meaningful connections. Throughout this episode, we'll delve into their experience on navigating relationships, overcoming challenges, and addressing sex addictions with grace and compassion. So get ready to be inspired and enlightened by this power couple as they share their candid advice and practical insights. Let's welcome Zach and Sierra. Welcome.
Awesome. Great introduction. I feel
Thank you.
very humbled. And that's right. I'm
I'm
Zach.
feeling pumped
Yeah,
up after
pumped.
the theme song. That
I feel pretty good.
I'm
Yeah.
feeling-
Thank you. I'm really proud of that music, by the way. So
It's
thank
amazing.
you.
Like, I got to download this song. This is phenomenal.
Thank you. So Zach and Sierra, let's jump right in. What's your guys' story? How do you get into being relationship coaches, and what are some of the challenges that you guys have had?
Well, I always like to. It's the funnest story of all. It's not a lot of people have this story, but we love to open up with, well, we met at band camp.
True story.
True story. And that's always the
Right? Like
reaction
how
we get.
perfect for this podcast.
Yeah.
Oh boy. Oh,
So you
boy.
can imagine and we were young high school kids. I was like 16 years old, and she was like, I think, 15. So about a year, and we were one grade apart. And I first saw her on the marching field at band camp practicing. So I was wearing bleached frosted tips in my hair when I had it, and a puka shell necklace. And I was just a little butterfly running around.
Yeah, which is back in style.
In style.
And we were really great friends first, which I think served us pretty well. And then all of a sudden,
connection happened.
Yeah, it became more serious than that.
Yeah, I mean, to go through that really fast, we went through the high school sweetheart stage. I ended up dating one of her friends for just a few months. You know how high school relationships go. We would go out to double dates. I specifically remember maybe it was Red Robin or something like that, Applebee's. And we ended up, she had her boyfriend. I had my girlfriend, which was her friend. And it was like a cute little high school double date, very harmless. And then Sierra and I were ended up just connecting the whole time. And I'm like, I just got to hang around this girl more often. And then you kind of fast forward, that friendship really fostered. And eventually we ended up, I guess, making more of a commitment later on in high school.
Mm-hmm. And I think part of the challenges, or how we kind of ended up as coaches later on, was because we had to grow up together while also growing together. We kind of laugh that there are a lot of things. There was a lot of things in our adult lives that we were doing for the first time with each other.
Yes.
Those very basic things like paying bills, making sure that you fill your gas tank, and those very basic things you do as an adult. We were learning how to do them and growing into adults and trying to grow up together. So there was a lot of challenges, or Zach moving faster than me or me moving faster than Zach, and just our growth into adulthood from being teenagers.
Yes. And when you look around, you only had others to compare it to. Mm-hmm. And so we often joke, like, you hear people when they get separated or divorced, or it could be any sort of major challenge, and you often hear, you're just not the same person as I married, or I don't know you anymore. And our response to that now is like, good.
Goodness, you're not the same 16-year-old crazy guy.
Yeah. So we're definitely no stranger to, and we can dive into this, but we've experienced it all. A lot of people think it's like this honeymoon state. Oh, how cute, high school sweethearts, been together for so long. You got a 10-year-old son and a 7-year-old daughter. Great. Well, yeah. If you don't want to talk about sex addiction, infidelity, alcohol abuse, sometimes verbal, and the occasional, when we were really young, but limited physical. And you have a myriad and just a nightmare of events that on paper would justify divorce multiple times over. I mean, I look back and I'm like, I would have been like, yeah, that makes sense. You're separating. It's often a miracle that we're still together.
So besides all those things, everything is just sunshine and rainbows.
That's great.
Besides those couple things, it's been a dream ride. And I think part of it too was, out of our group of friends, we got married still in college. I had a semester left in college when we got married, and then we had kids first. And so we were the first in our community doing a lot of different things. And that also brought with it that comparison to this fantasy of what it should be like, because no one else was doing it. And so when things started to, quote unquote, go wrong, there was no talk about it. There was a lot of shame around it. It was very isolating, because all we knew was this comparison to this fantasy that doesn't really exist, by the way.
We had no friends. We were also at that stage where we were ahead of a lot of our peers. Like when you get married, and when you get married that young, I remember, like, to your point, relying on a show, a TV, or a 50-year-old couple that is where I should be now if you're married. And because I couldn't talk to any of my friends about it.
No, so it seemed like couples who had been married for a while, it just kind of happened. And so when these things started to creep in, alcohol was a really big one, because we got married right after my 21st birthday. So alcohol was a big one. We were in college, and we just didn't see that happening in other relationships. So then it wasn't, and it didn't seem like, because at that time it's more common now for people to talk about therapists or counseling or seeking help. But when we got married, there really was no talk of that at all. So to talk about it, even with a friend, was like a no-no. And we both remember trying to talk about it with friends, and it almost couldn't even be handled. It couldn't even be caught by them, because it was so unrelatable at the time for them to hear that stuff.
Yeah. You had mentioned comparing yourselves to this fantasy or TV and movies. And, there's all these great movies, these romantic movies, but in some way, I think if you watch too much of that, it can hurt. What do you guys think?
Oh yeah. It's like I think it's a human condition to, we don't think this, we think from it, like a default, almost like an automatic default way of thinking is the fantasy. And because if you whatever you have, the only thing you're going to want to miss is what's missing right now for you. So when you look at that TV, you see how women are either interacted with, or men, or the fancy car and the boats, even just small little things where you watch a show about a couple and how the guy might interact with the girl. And let's say he slaps her on the butt, or maybe fondles her sexually. She kind of laughs and says, "Oh, stop it!" And everyone kind of, that was like the American Pie era. You grow up in that, oh, that's what men kind of, they flirt by kind of like sexually flaunting with women. So a big conflict in our earlier marriage was around just sexual activity in general, and me projecting what Sierra, quote unquote, and this is the dangerous word, should be like, or how she should react when I do blank. And there was no real comparison.
No.
And so I saw you as like, you're not fun, or you're wrong, because every other girl I see allows it.
Right. And to be a young woman during that time, also learning about sexuality and intimacy and all of those things and what it could look like was really different. And I went on my own journey over here to discover that, while Zach was doing what he was doing over there. And so there were these little moments as we were growing up together. You could talk, it could be alcohol, it could be sex or intimacy, even communication. And we were learning from different things. And so in the desire to want to connect more, to learn more, we were actually learning completely separately. So we kind of kept dividing the farther and farther we went in our growth journeys. Me learning about sex over here, him learning about it over here, learning about alcohol over here, because there was nothing to really bring it together as a relationship.
Sierra, you said Zach was doing his thing over there. Zach, what were you doing over there?
It's like the guy in the corner.
I think just, it was more, I think in the sex piece of it, I was more proactive. At the time, I worked for a company empowering women and teaching them about sex and sex toys and things like that, and in a really healthy way. And so I was having this really profound experience where I think, Zach, correct me if I'm wrong, because I feel like this sounds bad, but know that I'm talking to your 21-year-old self, is I think during that time you were just kind of monkey braining living.
Yes.
Like it was just, this is what you do, right? You just can you can just slap your wife on the butt and she likes it, right? I think that's what.
Or I get sex whenever I want.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
if I don't, then you're not a good wife.
Right.
Yeah. I think, and what I was doing is just trying to fill. I was aimless, right? There was no, first off, there was no, and we can get into this later. There was no agreement between Sierra and I. Like there was no foundational, there was nothing to stand on in terms of our couple. And there was no agreed upon co-own experience of what intimacy might look like. We were just, like you said, monkey braining around. So I was going to work every day, happy hour, 5, almost every single day, drinking at least a light week would be 4 days a week, but I was probably drinking 6 days a week, sometimes 7. And that, to me, that was just normal. It's what you did in the software world, and we were having a good time, sales life, and it was high octane. I often joked if I wasn't with Sierra, I'd probably be on alcohol and cocaine or something. But just anything to kind of like stimulate me and have a good time. So then when I remember earlier on in the marriage when obviously I wasn't really wooing Sierra, when you weren't really turned on by me. You look into like self-satisfying desire. So masturbation became like a big part of my life. I remember like it was I probably satisfied myself more than I can even, like, sometimes multiple times a day. And it got to a point where it was like what I needed to do to fill the void that what I wasn't getting. And the story I would tell myself is like, well, this is that's okay. This is what you have to do. If your wife isn't going to put out, like, my hand's fine enough. And of course it leads to porn and relying on that. And what I wasn't really awake to is what was kind of in the background of like this really a desire of kind of being seen and kind of heard and experienced, but there was no communication happening. So it's, when you kind of look back, it's pretty clear there was nothing to, when things got tough and when things got uncertain in regard to our specific physical needs, there was no communication happening.
And so in that story that Zach is having over here, then I'm creating one over here. And you're right, there was no like lining up of our stories when it came to intimacy, sex, and honestly just being related. And so as that was happening, and you thinking you're doing a great job. I mean, when you're in those moments, I think it's easy to paint Zach as this bad guy who was just doing all these terrible things. But when you're in those moments, you really are self-serving. You think, this is how I'm going to get by. This is actually how I'm going to survive my marriage. And you really start to believe that. And so for me, how was I going to survive my marriage? I couldn't get close to this man. It was incredibly hard to even want to be near him physically.
It's hard to have sex with somebody that reeks of alcohol.
That too. And so for me, it was, well, how am I going to find that feeling of feeling wanted or feeling desired? And so for me, what that looked like was, well, I'm going to go flirt with other people, and I bet I could get somebody to have sex with me. And sure as heck, I was able to do that. And so as I started to kind of entertain that and go, well, gosh, I can actually feel a lot of desire over here. Someone could actually want me and show me that they want me and actually respect what I'm doing and what I'm saying and have these deep conversations and this and that. That's how I was surviving my marriage. And so in my eyes, and if you were to ask me during that time, I would have painted myself like a victim, and that story would have looked really good. I mean, it would have looked like a really good story.
Yeah.
You can also hear it and go, gosh, what a witch, you know, how could she possibly do that? But you have to realize, I think, that when you pass a point in your relationship where you're no longer being related, you're really surviving. And that is kind of what started, I think, to happen in our relationship. Now, when we got married, we were very fortunate to join a community right away of other couples who talked about problems on a weekly, quarterly basis.
Wise.
And we were very fortunate that one couple we were coaching with called something out. They said, we don't know what's going on. Something's going on. And you guys need to talk about it. And it wasn't that, you know, they're not counselors or therapists or anything like that. And quite frankly, that's not what we needed at the time. But there were some things going unsaid that we had to start kind of taking a peek at. And that's when we started to, well, I was ready to hit the road. I was ready to get a divorce. Right. Whereas Zach refused. He was like, no, we're going to do whatever it takes. And that was a big turning point. And I think when we started to get really,
were you looking for that? Like, I didn't get that impression. Maybe you were, but I didn't get that impression at the time that you were like, because you often hear like, I just wanted you to see that you cared. And like, cause I kind of like, that wasn't an option. Like I would have literally, we joke, like I would have been stage 5 cleaner. I would not let you gotten. But were you looking for that type of conviction, or like what?
You did that type of conviction.
Yeah, but what allowed
lived that type of conviction?
I lived it. So I get curious about that sometimes. Yeah. I'm like, what if you
lived that type of conviction? It literally was like a light bulb went off, and he went, "Oh my goodness." And she's gonna really walk out the door. And I had money set aside. I had a girlfriend ready to take me and my son, and like, we were ready. I mean, I was ready to go.
Yeah, you were serious.
I was not. I was ready to go. And this newfound commitment, it was whatever he saw in what they had said, right, reflected back to us. So something's going on. We don't know what it is, but you can't hide anymore. And I think that was a big aha of, for all that time, we had been able to hide a lot of these problems from our friends and family.
And speaking of hiding the problems, was there any more infidelity?
No.
It was, I don't know if you call it like a season. It was, I don't know how long of a window it was.
There was only a couple instances.
Yes. Yeah, it wasn't, there was no affair. It was more, I guess, lustful actions.
And it was this on both of you?
Mine.
Okay.
I mean, so yes and no, just hers physically. And but I was definitely, I definitely was looking, I was definitely lustful and cheating on Sierra emotionally and mentally.
Mine was physical.
Yeah. So I looked at women very lustfully, either at work or anywhere else, and via porn or, so I was still very much cheating on her visually and relying on other women for that sense.
Yeah.
So you guys are disconnected. You, Zach, you used masturbation and of course porn. To what extent would you use pornography? So you said you would go sometimes 3 times a day or so.
Oh yeah, your addiction kind of piece. It was sometimes it wasn't even about. It wasn't, because I have a different relationship now, or an association and meaning that I've created around sex now, and now it's much more than just physical pleasure for me now. But at the time, it sounds crazy, but I used it as a source of just entertainment sometimes.
Doesn't sound crazy at all.
And it's like there would be no reason besides something to do.
Yeah,
bored.
Yeah,
I know it feels good. It's bored. Let's do it. Why not? And at the time, when I've learned, when I get stressed, rather than dealing with the stress, it's easier to just entertain myself, and that could be. And sometimes it wasn't porn. Sometimes it was excessive video games. Sometimes it was drinking. And it was typically video games or porn and drinking. And it's anything to take me away from dealing with something at that moment.
Right. And for me to not have to deal with all that, I would be going out with my girlfriends. We would be going out by ourselves. Some of them were single, some of them were not, so I was never putting myself in environments that were going to be supportive of dealing with anything that I had to deal with. And so it wasn't until we had a couple point something out that we hadn't seen before, and then you kind of flipped a switch. And I think it was in that switch flipping that we started to then get a little curious about, well, what is it that we could do, and why hasn't anything worked? And so both of us kind of started engaging in the concept and new conversations about relationship.
Yeah, I think we got really curious of kind of the why maybe behind it, of like, I have this strong desire to drink, or I have this strong desire to masturbate and watch porn. It wasn't always just, it was specifically porn and masturbation. Sometimes porn was just fun and it was entertaining. At the same time, getting curious on, was there like a fear? Was there a trauma? Was there a desire? Was there a story that I've gotten locked into? And a lot of times when events happen in your childhood, because I've dealt with I'm not finding the word, molestation in my past, and so having that there's this story, and I don't relate to it as a trauma. I relate to it as a story of like being like pursued, maybe in a creepy way, but it changes your relationship and the story you tell yourself with what this activity means.
Absolutely.
And therefore, how you get connectedness is physical pleasure.
Right. And there was no conversation about that for quite some time until we started to uncover some more stuff in our relationship, where then a lot of things started to make sense once we kind of engaged in that work a little bit more.
Sierra, did you know that he had been molested?
No. So I would say we were probably a good 2 years maybe into doing the work that we do now, where there were certain things that we both had and said, oh goodness, we need to talk about these. And so that was, I don't know, we probably started talking about that about 10 years ago.
Yeah, it is often Chamberlain. We were in we moved. We were in a larger house. We since downsized. We were sitting in our bedroom after a workshop that we took. I think we had like a 3-year-old son and like a 1-year-old daughter, or maybe older, 4-year-old son. But we had very young kids in the crib still. And we went to this workshop, and it was our second time taking it. and this is the work we lead now. And there was an opportunity to share withholds, and it's very scary because you have to give a lot of grace and space to your partner. And we opted to not share it the first time, and we didn't share it in the workshop. We actually
we just made the request.
We made the request. Can I wait? I have something to tell you, and I'm scared to tell you. I'm worried that if I tell you, it'll change everything. And that allowed for a space of grace. And then that's when essentially she found out, and we both found out.
Yeah.
So I shared with her things that have happened to me and I've done in my past, and then what she has done in her past.
Right. I had shared about
that's how I found out
all of these things.
She actually got away scot-free with it, if that makes sense. Like I could have never known.
Oh, I didn't. Okay. I did not get away scot-free. I was suffering so incredibly hard in my health, in my mental health, by keeping all of that in. And so while my story may have gotten away scot-free, my body, my mental health, my state of motherhood and mothering was all impacted by keeping in these secrets, really.
So, Sierra, did you have anything like the molestation happen to you as well? Or?
I had one incident when I was 12 or 13 years old, and it actually wasn't until recently. And I think that's quite common for women, right? When you start talking about it as an adult and you realize, oh my goodness, all of us were molested when we were in middle school.
Jeez.
What the heck? And I don't say all of us lightly, but I will say quite a few. And it was in one of those conversations where we all realized, gosh, that was terrible. And no one knew better. And when I say no one knew better, I mean, with Zach's story and with mine, there is a level of communicating with kids that we have now that I'm so grateful for, because we just didn't have that growing up. It was very different. It was a very different conversation. And so we got to talk about those things. And I don't feel, and I don't want to speak for you, but I don't think that either of us feel trapped or married to that story, or that it impacts us. Like, they're very much released. Like, we can talk about them and even joke about them, and they don't have a lot of hold on us anymore, if that makes sense.
In my experience with coaching guys addicted to porn, all of them have some type of trauma, not necessarily being molested, but they all have some type of trauma. And they're all very different. Like, mine is not being molested. It was being ignored, really. Like, my parents were awesome, great. But my dad was a very logical guy, a professor. And my mom would often joke while he was alive that she was a widow to books, because my dad was always in the basement in his study with a nose in a book. And so my dad didn't purposely ignore me, but I have two older brothers, but I was basically, I was basically ignored by my father. And so being ignored was my quote unquote trauma. And so everybody's got a trauma, and big or small, it's there. And one of the challenges that I had was that I knew I had some challenges, but I sought regular traditional help through a therapist and medication, going to 12-step meetings where you say that. Have either of you ever been to a 12-step meeting?
No.
Not been there, no.
Okay. So they have you say, I am powerless. Hi, my name is Eric. I'm a sexaholic. I'm powerless over porn. And it's been X amount of days since I've been sober. And that was my mantra, I'm powerless. I'm powerless. And that didn't work for me. So that hence the whole Powerful Eric thing. One day I just decided I'm not calling myself that anymore. And that was the day that pitiful, powerless, porn-addicted Eric died, and Powerful Eric was born. So I appreciate you sharing those traumas, and sounds like you've been able to work through them and are in a good place now.
Well, yeah, and I think what allowed us to work through it, though, is a scene differently. Once we realized
there's a new view.
And I think once we realized all of our actions are determined by how we view something, and a part of how we view something is found inside the story we tell about a happening. There's a happening, and then there's a meaning behind the happening. And that's where I think I love what you said, is that's where a lot of power is once you realize that you are a story, and how you tell that story can create infinite possibilities. And it becomes a profound way to live when you see the choice inside of that.
Right. And rather than using the narrative of, well, if you had my story, you would be doing things differently, and using that as like a wedge in between you, we really started to see that as, you're right, actually. And every single opportunity where I have said you've been wrong, I would have done the exact same thing with the life that I had lived up until that point if I was in your shoes. And there was something that had happened there that just kind of, I think, changed the trajectory of everything.
Yes. And and without getting too far ahead, we definitely are happy to share some of the insights that really allowed us to explore that. But it was, it doesn't mean that you, there's a lot of ordinary, what we call upsets and disappointments and challenges, including porn addiction, sex addiction, infidelity. To the average, maybe to our culture or society, it might sound
like deal breakers.
It might sound like deal breakers, and it even might sound like an understatement to say it's ordinary, but it is ordinary.
Yeah,
it is ordinary.
So before we end here, you guys are going to be on the next podcast as well, sharing your insights on how you guys turn things around and things like that. But before we get to that, you had mentioned some of the things that you tried that didn't work. What were some of the things that really didn't help or didn't work for you guys? Like for me, it was going to the 12-step meetings, and I actually got worse going to those meetings because I found new ways to act out. I'm like, oh, there's a website for that. Oh, you can do that. So I actually got much worse. Anything like that for you guys that when you tried to?
That's actually a really good question. I always laugh because Zach's therapist told him to stop coming or something. I always think, or, you don't need this. I don't know why you're here. It's something to that effect. And a lot of the things that we tried, because keep in mind, when we were going through this, we seemed and felt like we were the only ones because we were the first ones married. So a lot of what we tapped into were books and tips and tricks, because if you go on Amazon right now, you'll get 1 million hits on how to fix your relationship.
Yeah.
And ones that I think have a good intention but can be very harmful are ones like the 5 love languages. I know that's very popular. It is by book cover, by tips. It's great. It's great information. And I think that's where we noticed, and I use that one just because it's a very popular one.
Yeah, very.
A lot of people know. However, when you read these books, you have to realize that you're reading them as information. You're not actually being guided or experiencing anything for yourself. And it kind of talks about relationships as if everyone has the same story. And if you just do X, Y, and Z or this each day, you will be fine. And it kind of plays into that fantasy. They're almost maybe even worse, but just as bad as movies or films. And so that's kind of what we started to notice, was that trend in a lot of those types of books.
Yeah. And, I am a self-development addict. Like I love all those books, seminars, all that stuff. I love that. But I totally agree. And one challenge that I've found is that they call it self-help. Like self, like I'm going to read this book. I'm going to help myself. But what you mentioned, Sierra, is that there's no one there to guide you or help you. So Speaking of guiding and helping you, on the next episode, Zach and Sierra are going to be back, and they're going to share some of the things that did work, that did help. So we're going to break right here. They'll be back for the next episode, and we look forward to having back Zach and Sierra. Thanks, Zach. Thanks,
Good.
Sierra.
Thank you.
Are you struggling with porn or sex addiction? Then apply for a free strategy call with Eric today at powerfuleric.com.
Okay, there's show number 1. That's great. You guys are great. This is fun.
Yeah.
Oh, I was
yeah.
having a great time.
Oh man, I feel like oh, we should have told that horrible story.
I don't
That's a
like,
good
oh,
one,
we
too,
could
that.
have told that.
There's that-
Well, we can do it again. We can do it again for sure. Okay, so we talked about the challenges, the problems, and now we are going to start podcast number 2. And let me cue up the music and we'll talk about the solutions.
Okay, great.
Control.
Chains in your eyes. No more feeling powerless. No shame, take your power. Break out of the pain. Because it's more than fornication, more than procreation. It's not just self-stimulation. Sex energy is co-creation and transformation into a new destination. One time, yeah. Change your heart from dark to light. One time, yeah. Break free, take back your power, your awareness. Take back your power. Take back your power. Take back your power. This is Porn Talk. This is Porn Talk Live. Here is your host, Eric Zuzak.
Welcome back to Porn Talk. Today we are back with the dynamic duo, Zach and Sierra. Their insights and wisdom combined with their 20 plus years of experience together have left a lasting impact on many. We can't wait to dive deeper into their experience on relationships and personal transformation. So grab your favorite beverage, get cozy, and let's embark on another exciting episode today. Welcome back, Zach and Sierra. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome.
So we talked about the challenges, the problems. Now let's talk about solutions. So to catch you up, if you haven't listened to the prior episode, please do that. But just in a nutshell, Zach was getting into alcohol and porn and masturbation. Sierra had some infidelity. So they had some very serious challenges. They almost got divorced, but they didn't. They're here now 20 plus years together. So tell us about some of the solutions.
Yeah. Well,
First off, I feel like in my mind, we've almost gotten divorced multiple times. 2 in my mind. You say 3. I don't relate to the third, but
it was over here with me.
I know. There's 2 that I was like, code red. So it wasn't a one-time deal, and we want to be clear that what we'll share with you is not that there's no place to quote unquote get and stay. And a lot of times the mischief that happens in things that we'll share is it sounds like, okay, if I can do that, then I'll have. And I think that's an important distinction.
Or if I can get through it this time, then we will be fine.
Then we'll be fine. And so when we made it pass and broke through a barrier of divorce, and then it came up again, it's like, oh my gosh, maybe this is meant to be. And then it comes up again. Well, third time's the charm. This obviously won't work. And what we're sharing with you is simply applying things that make a difference in the relationship. There is no arrival. There's no arrival. It's an act of creation that has to be constantly explored. So I wanted to kind of put that up there as a primer as you think through some of the things we're about to share.
Yeah. And I think part of what we do now is really a culmination of not just our process, it's also a community effort that we've been working with for almost a decade now. And we could easily sit here and give you tips and tricks, and those will be nice, but it will really just be like putting perfume on after a hard gym workout.
Yeah, I totally relate to what you're saying, because when I was trying to overcome sex and porn addiction, I always had a lot of tools, tricks, tactics you could use, but not until I had that core change in my identity.
Yes.
Instead of looking myself as Eric the sexaholic, Eric the powerless sexaholic, until I turned that around, it was really challenging. So then all those tools, techniques, and tactics could really work much better when I had that core change.
I love.
Yeah.
I don't know if maybe it sounds like you do realize the power of what you just said is so profound.
Mm-hmm.
And what you're talking about is the power of language. And one of the first things we do, and it's a really weird question, when people want a better relationship, they want a better life, we specifically around couples or individuals wanting to be inside a relationship, we ask, like, it's a very weird question, where is your relationship? Like, it's a very odd question. And if you look, not just relationships, but anything in life that's important to you is found inside your language. It is not a physical thing. It's actually what you say about it. If you just look, and if you're listening to this, look, it is found inside. That is the location of value. It's found inside what you say about it. And I think what you said is so profound,
Mm-hmm.
because what it is it's an act of creation that is followed up by action. But it's what you said about it is what really created the shift.
Mm-hmm.
And what we would offer is it's not the thing, but damn, it's a great place to start.
It is. And you nailed it right on the head. There was something that wasn't going to be just a change. Maybe this tip or trick might have changed something for a moment, but we were starving for transformation. And so we lovingly say our work is for people who are hurting in their relationship, and it's for people who are hungry for like the next level in their relationship. If you're fine being you're fine, if you're good being good, we are not for you, because we're looking for people who want to actually transform.
Yep.
And not just put a nice spritzer of perfume on so you smell nice and so your relationship looks nice and it feels nice. We want to transform it. And that's what we were starving for.
So we're not here to be like, well, if you're having a hard time connecting, here are 3 things you can do. Have a date night. Look at each other in the eyes and talk about what you appreciate. Like those things, it's like, okay.
I promise you, if you are experiencing infidelity in your relationship,
Those
that
things won't
cute thing's not going to work.
Having some alone time won't do it.
Yeah. So we were really fortunate to have one of those transformative experiences.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason it happened was because we were inside of community. We said in the last episode, we were sitting across from another couple. They called something out and we had to face it. It was right there. We couldn't hide it anymore. And so if you are looking for a transformation in your experience, in an addiction, and when I say addiction, I mean quite literally anything. We're health coaches as well. We see it with food, with sugar, right? All of those things. Yeah. You cannot have a transformative experience without a guide and within community. That is what community is for. They're a reflection of your environment, of your behavior. They make your story more real because they're telling you and giving you feedback, of what is actually kind of oozing out of you. So we always encourage really great, healthy community. And because we were in healthy community, we started to engage in that conversation about relationship and what it actually was, because we realized quite quickly that all of the books we read, all of the, counseling and therapy and methodologies and all of these different things, not one of them answered the question of what a relationship is. So here are all these resources on how to fix something, and no one can identify what they're trying to fix.
And for proof, if I asked you, Your definition of a relationship will be different than your mom's or your brother's or your sister's or your friends or your coworkers. Why is it that we get different, sometimes the polar opposite definitions of a relationship? But if I ask you to explain what a chair is, everyone around the world is directionally going to explain the same thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So I know this is a very important topic here. Let me back up just a little bit. You said about definitions. When you say community, what do you mean community? Like, are you talking about an in-person meeting? Are you talking about like an online forum? What do you mean community?
Oh, both are very valuable. So there is value in being with people who are for you. You know what I mean? For you, people who are for your well-being, for your goals. Some of those communities are online. For us, we had communities that were all over the country, different couples all over the country, and some were in person. But community that's going to be for you. So for many, that does look like, maybe reaching out to a community group or trying to find something that is local.
And, I think you hit on something really core that is a big challenge nowadays, in my opinion, because I grew up in a very religious household, and now I'm more spiritual than religious. But I was telling my wife, one of the big things that I do miss, I have to admit, is the community. And a lot of churches are closing down now, or being closed. And I'm not saying a person needs to be religious per se, but there is definitely value there of those communities, and I think there is a void there.
Yes.
So anyway.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think somewhere in
Nailed it on the head,
one of the oldest libraries of all time, the Bible even says it's not good for man to be alone. And there is a lot of truth in that experience. And one of the things that helps is, so if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know a community, I'm in this I'm in a community at the bar, and we all get drunk and masturbate all the time.
Healthy community.
Yeah. So what do we mean by healthy? See, and I would go even further to say it's not just a healthy community; it's a community that aligns with your purpose
and wise counsel. Like, who are the people you are talking to? Who are the people who are listening? And not listening to speak next, not listening to give their advice of something they've never even been through before, but who's that wise counsel that you're actually seeking a place to land your heavy junk?
And the value of a purpose allows you to say yes and no in the right situations.
Yeah.
The value of a purpose is we've opened up our entire life schedule, because now that we're clear on what our couple's purpose is, like to live outwardly in the world of relationships, make a difference in the world of relationships. That's what made this podcast easy to say yes to, versus if it was like a video game podcast, I would probably just say no, because it's just not where I like video games. I'm not against them, but it allows you to say yes and no to things in your life. Now, I want to feel free to go back if I don't want to throw us off here, but sometimes folks, especially that might be listening to this, they're still a little bit unsatisfied, because there's that addiction of looking for, okay, get to the point and tell me what to do. And what we're offering is, when we started to experience, no joke, like extreme peace in our relationship and ease, and not critical upset around sex or intimacy, or Sierra being wanted and loved and appreciated. What allowed us to experience that is actually seeing something for what it actually was. And simply seeing it for what it was, what it allowed us to do is become radically responsible for our actions. And I'll give you just for proof to kind of help you conceptualize this. If anyone's like, I think I get what you're saying. This is a perfect analogy. Imagine a boiling hot coffee mug without a handle, and you're looking at it, and the only way you can grab the coffee mug without a handle is what? Like, you have to kind of have your hand open like a cup and kind of grab it. and you're going to burn yourself. So what do? You go on Amazon, you buy a glove so you can pick up and not burn your hand and drink the mug, or you buy a tool, or you hire somebody else to do it for you, or you buy a towel. You buy gimmicks to not burn your hand.
Mm-hmm.
What we do and what we're asking is stop for a moment. And what if we just turn the coffee mug and you can see a handle on the other side? You can still buy all the gimmicks. You can still do all those things.
Those will work.
Those will work.
I mean, they'll work, but eventually you're going to need a new glove because it's going to get worn out.
And now you have to take radical responsibility for how you show up with that mug, because now you can't unsee that handle.
That's a great analogy. I love that.
That's what we do in relationship is we
do.
show people like now it's quite clear on why I had a porn addiction. It's quite clear on why I was addicted to video games.
It's quite clear why I went and slept with someone else. It's like, oh,
it wasn't because I wasn't showing my love.
Right.
That's like 3 levels up.
Mm-hmm.
If you typically, people want to add things. So if you really want to solve something, and you did it too, you started it with language, is sometimes you have to take away things so you can actually see more clearly.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And if somebody's a longtime listener, they've heard this story many times, but you can't see this right now, but over my shoulder here is this golden Buddha. And there's a story, true story, that these monks had this giant golden Buddha. They knew this invading army was coming in, so they disguised it. They covered it in clay and mud, and their disguise worked. The invading army did come, but unfortunately killed all the monks that knew that the golden Buddha was there. 100 years passes, another set of monks is there. He's like, what's that glimmer of light there? And they unearth this massive golden Buddha. And that is us. We get in life buried in traumas and addiction, infidelity, and we lose sight of who we really are.
Yes.
And then it's funny because we wonder, and people may say, well, gosh, if Zach had done that, I'd never trust him again. Or if Sarah had done that, I'd never trust him again. And it's like, well, you didn't really know who you were dealing with. And what if you unveiled so much that you knew so much, but then you were able to just trust? Yeah. It's available. It's available right there.
So you brought up a huge word, and that is trust. Let's talk about that word, trust.
Let's do it. We know it. We know it well. Let's do it.
How did you guys, after porn and sex addiction, after infidelity, how did you rebuild trust in your relationship?
So something that we help walk people through, because we think that the word trust is used incorrectly.
Okay.
And so language is really important in what we do. So we're going to give you some other words to look at, because trust, similar to honor or love or cherish, it's something that you can just give a person.
It's a gift.
You can just do it.
There is no earning.
There's no earning or value around it. It's actually something that you can just do. And the reason we know this to be true, and remember, this is going to be like information, because we can't guide you through a process right now. So this might be information, but it'll hopefully be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
So we get in our cars each day and we drive on the road, and we have a lot of trust for hundreds of people we do not know.
Yeah.
I'm trusting they know how to drive. I'm trusting they got a license. I'm trusting they're insured. They know how to
trust they're not going to cross that line.
Right? We go about our days trusting so much, trusting that the checker knows what they're doing, that nobody's going to spit in my food when I go to a restaurant. Okay. So we know that it's like very available to us all the time.
What people are probably referring to is confidence
and predictability.
When you hear you have to earn my trust, is not true. What they're saying, and it's not good or bad. A lot of times people hear this as bad, like I have to change it. No, we're not asking you to change anything. We're just asking you to be responsible for the gift that you have. That's always up to you. I can't put the responsibility on Sierra to be trustful. I can choose to trust her as a gift. However, it's a fair request to say, I need more confidence. I'm not going to give you my gift of trust, and I'm unwilling to. However, I am going to trust you today, and then I'm going to trust you again tomorrow, or I'm going to trust you for the next hour. Confidence is relying based off of some sort of predictability, and you need to see like data points so you can feel confident in predicting the next move. We typically collapse trust into confidence.
The word, what comes to mind when you, what you're saying, trust is a noun, correct? That is a noun. So, but when I'm looking at it as a verb, as trusting, and that you can, if it's a choice, then you can take this action to trust and be trusting of that person.
Right.
Yeah.
So if you think of it as a choice, like I am going to trust.
Yes.
I'm not going to trust as long as this happens. I'm not going to know. You take it. Trust. I'm going to trust this person. You then start living that way. You start, making other opportunities available. You start seeing new things about them or not. And you still can say, I'm going to trust you today.
Because that is the single most challenging thing that I come across with when I'm working with a guy that he's gung-ho, he's breaking his porn addiction, he's doing great.
Yep.
But his wife doesn't believe that or doesn't see that. And that is one of the biggest challenges.
Yes.
It is. It's really challenging because it is something that we have been taught that it has to be earned.
Yes.
And when you think of it as a gift to give someone, it actually provides an amazing space for that person to live in. Because when you are living a life walking on eggshells, that's a hard life. So as a spouse, you're wanting to see your partner make a change, and yet you're creating an environment that is antithetical to any type of transformation because they're having to walk on eggshells around you because you're not trusting. And so when you really go through the process of taking off those layers, right, chipping away the mud on the golden Buddha, something's available to you. And what that might look like, and what we see in a lot of couples when we uncover those things, is, oh wow, there's trust.
And the challenge is there's something undermining this experience that we have to be here. I mean, our workshop's 2 days. I can tell you again, but it'd sound like information, but I give you a little bit of a teaser of what might be in the background for people and what might be available to your male clients and the wife is when the experience of trust is the giver is unwilling to give because it cannot be earned. What might be available to explore is, can there be a promise made? And promises are also one of those nefarious words that get abused. Like, you can't promise yourself anything. That's more like a committed intention or state of mind. Promises and commitments are the very foundation to all relationships, and they are co-owned. So what might be available is, and Sierra and I had to explore this quite a bit, is specifically around drinking. Like, there was a point where I had to promise Sierra I would not drink and drive at all, like 0 drinks. And then we got to a point where, and she just trusted. And I'm like, okay, do you trust me today? Yes. And I said, I promise I will take this action today or all week. And so she's counting on me, not just me to own the promise, but to also take action on the promise. So, so there is an action that can be done. It's
not a wait and see if he does it attitude. It's I am a participant in the other side of this. So maybe that looks like checking in. Maybe that looks like the environment is right. So when things are co-owned, it's really a new experience of operating in your relationship rather than being across from someone who is just waiting to see if you fail. That's a really hard place to live.
So what might be available? We never did this with porn, and it didn't lend itself to that, but we did it with other things. is in situations like if the wife or you or me are unable to or are not willing to trust, there's a game to be played, and that game is a new promise. And maybe that promise is, hey, every single day, why don't you check in with me and let's have a conversation around like your wins around porn or your wins around X topic. So it's like it's a collaborative, co-owned experience. And then that's where that relatedness starts to happen. It's the wait and see is you start to approach relationship adversarially. And a lot of breakdown that happens is you start to look at your partner to see if they're going to pass or fail. And you're actually operating from an individual paradigm versus a we.
If you're operating in your relationship with doubt, with distrust, with a wait and see attitude, you're going in expecting it to fail, and you're going in with the resistance. And so what we would love people to engage with is, flipping that back around. I mean, like, well, what if you let go of all of these layers? And what a lot of people say, well, I've been hurt in the past, so I'm very, what do people say, I'm very closed or not open, I keep things very, very private. And my question is, how is that working for you? How are your relationships?
Well, Zach and Sierra, I could talk to you guys all day. I mean, you have some great insights. Zach, you had mentioned some seminar, or what is, if someone wants to learn more about you guys or what you do,
yes,
how do they do that?
So Sierra, I'll let you add that it's the second piece, but we do have workshops. Our core transformational offering is it's a 2-weekend workshop. It's called The Path to Extraordinary Relationship. And you can find that on our website, Be Intact. And we do have 3 events coming up. One in Redmond, Seattle, Washington in October, 7th and 8th. And this is for singles that might be frustrated, looking for the next step, wanting to explore, and they feel maybe a bit stuck. And then we have one the very following weekend, the 14th and 15th, for couples, and then another one in Denver. You can find all that information on our website. We also, if you're just ready to take that, just a little baby step and just explore this topic a bit more, we have a ton of free resources that you put on.
So on our website, which is just www.beintact.com, you can download a free What to Say When guide, because sometimes approaching these conversations, especially when you're trying to take a new step that you have never taken before, that could be inviting your partner to something, or maybe having a conversation you have not been able to break through to before. We have this guide called What to Say When, and it'll break down some questions, and it's a pretty long one, so you can go to our website and download that.
That sounds like a phenomenal resource.
And if you're trying to broach, I'm going to
download that.
It's a lot of times we approach, in our attempt to save our marriage or save our relationship, we actually kill it by withholding things. So this guide is a step to give you the tool to engage in a conversation that allows for the space of listening and grace.
Right, because we find that many relationships are trying to survive and want so badly to be understood, and there's still just so many things in the way of doing that. So this guide is hopefully really helpful for that. That's our hope. And then we have ongoing retreats as well. There's one coming up. It's a little late to register for, but we do have ongoing retreats for couples who've completed the whole series. And that's the community we're talking about. That's one of them, at least. We're in a bunch of them, but that is one where it's a bunch of relationships who just want to be more related with their spouse.
There's that now what experience. Like there are probably plenty of people that listen to this podcast, and they're like, okay, we finally are at a place where we're healing around the damage I've done to my marriage, around this addiction or anything. What typically comes up is that, well, now what? And what we're offering is there is a place to actually explore, and actually not just explore, but be in this constant state of exploration.
Yeah. And for your listeners, we work with a lot of couples who have had similar stories like the ones you've shared, like the ones we've shared, whether it be porn or drugs. And, that takes a toll on relationships. And so I always remind people, you're in great company. You're in great company with people who are ready for growth in their life to make a difference. So
go to beintouch.com, right?
Be intact. So BEINTACT.com. And you can find us on Instagram and social media at Be Intact.
Be Intact. Got it. Beintact.com. Download the free guide that Sierra mentioned. I'm going to check that out myself. Thanks for being here today. And I'll close. Thank you so much for being here, guys. I'm going to close. I love this quote from Zig Ziglar, who says, "You are designed for accomplishment. You are engineered for success, and you are endowed with the seeds of greatness."
Thanks for listening. If you're struggling with porn or sex addiction, reach out to Eric at powerfuleric.com.